Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio.
Hello, dear friends. Welcome to Kardec Radio, 24/7, always nourishing our souls. I am Correa, and we are here tonight to study the divine laws. The divine laws are universal laws that guide not only humanity on the earth, but all other universal family members. They are eternal, immutable laws created by God. And where are they? If we are wondering, they are in our consciousness. However, Kardec asked, do we need reminders of the laws, considering that they are already in our conscience? The answer from the illuminated minds is yes, we do need reminders. This is why our very own Master Jesus incarnated on the earth as the governor of our planet to show us how to implement the law of love, divine love that encompasses all of the other human laws, because effort and repetition leads to progress, dear friends. We are here on Kardec Radio, joining in a beautiful teamwork effort for us to study the divine laws together, because together we dialogue and add to each other's thinking and therefore learn more. So tonight we are going to continue our study by focusing on the law of freedom, particularly freedom of conscience. We are going to focus our attention tonight on questions 835 and 836 of the Spirit's Book. Did you know that in the Spirit's Book, dear friends, Kardec devoted its entire third part to explaining to us the divine laws? So this is the educational tool of which we make use here on Kardec Radio to study together. Shall we begin? Let us begin, offering already much gratitude to everyone who is here, forming this beautiful current of light in both planes. And if you're joining us on demand, please feel embraced. Feel welcomed as a beautiful child of God. Should you feel like writing a comment or asking a question, please type it on the chat so we can interact with one another. Let us begin then. Question 835 of the Spirit's Book reads, is freedom of conscience a consequence of freedom of thought? Very good question. The answer from the illuminated minds is the following. Conscience is an inner thought that belongs to persons, as do all their other thoughts. So, dear friends, we already have learned from studying the Spirit's Book together that we are all free in thought in our mind, and now we know that we are free in our conscience. Conscience, as stated here, is that inner thought, inner voice that we hear in the back of our minds, helping us to make decisions, choices, to process our feelings and our daily situations as well. In the Spirit's Book also we learn that the first gut feeling, gut suggestion that we hear in our inner mental landscape here often comes from us, from our tendencies that we have brought from many lives. The second set of suggestions that emerge from in our minds here often comes from the illuminated minds that guide us. So it's beautiful how God grants to all of us freedom to think on our own. God loves us so much that God believes in our divine potential and gives us freedom to think and to make choices and decide on a particular course of action. We have many beautiful examples to illustrate freedom of thought, freedom of conscience. Let us think of Allan Kardec himself. 10 days ago, we celebrated Kardec's birthday, and we know that Kardec was very avant-garde. He created a whole new line of thought that has been transforming lives ever since he published the very book we are studying together. And we know that he faced, when he was still incarnated, much resistance because the ideas that he published in the Spirit's book were considered to be revolutionary. If we watch the movie Kardec on Netflix, which we highly recommend, we see that Allan Kardec, prior to codifying Spiritism, was already an established researcher and educator, had a great position in academia at the time, and his very own colleagues ostracized him, and he was even taken to prison, believing that his thoughts could be suppressed or withheld if he was taken to jail. Now we know, dear friends, that nothing of the sort is true. Of course, we may already have known this, but now we have the confirmation that we are all free in our thoughts, that even if our body is imprisoned, our mind can still be active and productive. So Kardec is a beautiful example of this, of someone who was withheld, who faced resistance, who was even taken to jail, and his thoughts were not stopped. His line of thinking still propagated, and we are holding part of his efforts literally in our hands. And even when the books, Spiritist books, were burned back in his time, the Spiritist teachings were even more propagated as a result, because no one can withhold the power of minds that come together for the same purpose, especially when they come together in two realms to do the good, right, dear friends? And aside from Kardec's example, we also can think of examples in our daily lives. Sometimes we have people living under the same roof as us, and we know that they sometimes hold ideas that are very different from ours. And often conflicts emerge because one of the parties, one of the relatives, tries to persuade the other to think the way that they would like the other person to think. But we know that that change in thought only comes with an inner decision, because that person, that relative, is free to think however they wish. In the book 2000 Years Ago by Emmanuel, we have a clear-cut example of how family dynamics sometimes illustrate the situation of relatives who have very different lines of thoughts. For example, Publio Lentulus was very much against Christianism as a senator. His wife, on the other hand, Livia, decided to embrace the doctrine of the Christ with all her heart. All their lives, Publio Lentulus tried to stop his wife from pursuing the life that she believed in. And yet, she continued to believe in the Christ. And when they discarnated, one suffered and the other ascended to the spheres where the Christ finds himself up to this day. How beautiful is that? That no matter what others do or say, we are free to tend for the mental garden that God has granted us. So the question for us is, the take home message for us is, for immortality is, because we are free to cultivate whatever kinds of thoughts we wish, what are the most common seeds that we are planting in the landscapes of our minds? What types of seeds are we planting in the landscapes of our minds? Have we, perchance, as co-creators that we are, taken the time to harvest compassion, for instance, to harvest benevolence, to harvest patience, to harvest faith? Yes, because if we plant seeds of faith, for instance, in our minds, faith will grow, because now we know that we are free to be sculptors of our own mind. How beautiful is that? We can be artists of our own thoughts. So what thoughts have we been sculpting lately? If we could visualize the shape of our thoughts, the consistency of our thoughts, the color of our thoughts, perhaps even the perfume of our thoughts. What would that sculpture or that painting look like? Because we just learned, dear friends, that we are artists of our very own minds. So, what kinds of paintings are we beautifully making? Every thought that we produce, together with every feeling, is a brush stroke that we paint in the canvas of our minds. So, it's up to us to build up, to paint, to portray a beautiful landscape for ourselves. Shall we invest in our mental, spiritual well-being by becoming artists of the good, sculptures of the good in our own minds? Shall we? Sounds like a very worthwhile project. This is what Master Jesus has done and continues to do. So much so that we also learn in the Spirit's book that the light emanating from the sun and the stars comes from very illuminated, pure spirits that emanate thoughts of love, compassion, kindness towards all of us. So we are literally, dear friends, sustained by thought forms of love. Isn't that wonderful? Now let us read the last question we will discuss together tonight. This question is question 836 of the Spirit's book. Kardec asks, do humans have the right to set up barriers to freedom of conscience? So the question is, can we limit someone's freedom of conscience? And the answer from the illuminated minds is no, more so than to freedom of thought. No more so than to freedom of thought, because God alone has the right to judge the conscience. If humans use their laws to regulate relationships between individuals, God uses the laws of nature to regulate relations between individuals and God. So, this is a very beautiful answer from the illuminated minds, dear friends, because on earth it is still very common in our relationship dynamic that we tell people, if I were you, I would. We don't believe that you took this course of action. Can we believe that this and that person did that? If we were them, we would do it differently. We can't believe, and we often judge or label others for the choices that they make. But when we do, dear friends, the challenge with that is we do not have a global understanding of that person's background to really truly measure where they are and why they have made the decision that they have made. In the book Jesus in the Home, Master Jesus himself advises that we understand each other to the maximum degree before we label one another. Why? Because when a person makes any decision, any choice, they make a decision not only based on what we can see, on what is obviously obvious, on what we can perceive with our physical senses, but they make decisions based upon their childhood experiences, the dynamics they had with their parents, the habits that they have created in this life, the habits that they bring from previous lives, the connections that they have made in this life, the connections that they have brought together with them in their network from previous lives, and they still have influence from the environment around them. So each person we meet has at least 7 layers of influence about them. So we would need, dear friends, a 7D camera to be able to understand one another a bit more clearly. And of course, we don't have this technology yet. We are still at the 3D level. So only God has eyes, symbolically speaking, to understand someone's true motivation. This is why Master Jesus recommends that we forgive one another, because we do not know why the other person does what they do, and we also, when we make less fortunate choices, we make them also because we do not know. We often don't have any intention of hurting anyone. When we do so accidentally. So, because we ourselves are learning to understand ourselves and learning to understand others, Master Jesus recommends that we practice compassion. This is why in the Lord's Prayer he says, "Forgive our trespasses as we forgive those who have trespassed against us." And through the light of Spiritism, dear friends, we know that this beautiful effort to achieve forgiveness is worthwhile. Why? Because we know that our vibratory frequency changes as we forgive. We are no longer shackled to the person whom we believe is the object or the cause of our hurt. We free ourselves, we become lighter, we vibrate higher because difficult feelings literally weigh us down. We vibrate higher, we connect with minds that are also thinking the good and that are also forgiving. We feel greater strength and we can make better choices. So it is good for our mental health, physical health, and spiritual health as well to choose to be compassionate, to choose to be loving, knowing now why. The beauty of Spiritism, dear friends, is that now we know even why logically it is important to do this as well, not only for our own health, but because others are free to choose whatever they wish, as are we. And we know that God is the only one judging, so we don't need to take matters in our own hands because God is already planning for that person in the future to have to handle the consequences of their actions the best way possible, not for punishing purposes, but for educational purposes, so that they can learn to make better choices as well. So we can see, dear friends, that God is love through and through. If we choose to enter the frequency of love, then we too can elevate ourselves, feel healthier, be healthier, and become happier. This is why Emmanuel, in the book Thought and Life, chapter 10, gives us the recipe for our holistic well being, seeking the good, thinking the good, visualizing the good, and molding the good with all the resources that we have at hand. And Master Jesus, of course, exemplified respect for freedom of thought and conscience up to the last minute. In listening to a podcast recently, we heard scholars in Spiritism bringing in an angle of Master Jesus's life that we hadn't thought of ourselves, that he spent his whole incarnation on earth praying for Judas to not make the mistake that he did, because no one has in their reincarnatory plan the plan to do evil, to hurt others. So Master Jesus supported him through and through. Even after Judas, committed suicide, he was welcomed by Mother Mary and cared for Mother Mary. And Master Jesus from the spiritual realm spent centuries supporting Judas until he incarnated as Joanna d'Arc and became um, rebalanced himself and gained peace once again because he came to terms with his own conscience. So we see that Master Jesus did not derogate the law. He did not destroy the law. Though he was the governor of the planet, he respected Judas' freedom of thought and conscience, but he supported Judas all the way through. And now they are side by side working in the same team as they were meant to do and as we are as well. So let us work on our spiritual progress, dear friends. Let us invest on our divine nature. Let us become artists of our own mental landscapes. Let us build beautiful sculptures with every thought that we co-create, shall we? Thank you, Mark Carlos and Erica de Camargo, for joining us. We wish you many blessings, a lovely evening, and let us keep investing on our divine nature. Many blessings, dear friends, and we will see you next time. Thank you.